Well, I want to welcome Dr. Dale Atkins to our conversation today. Dr. Dale is a renowned psychologist, a relationship expert. You're the author of books. I remember watching you many, many times on the Today Show, where you were a contributor for many years. And you help millions of people improve their lives by focusing on different aspects of the most important thing in their lives, that is their relationships. And you wrote this book with a really interesting title, and I can't wait to hear what inspired you, Dr. Dale, to write it. But I think I have a sneaking suspicion. Dr. Dale, what caused you to, or inspired you to write the Turquoise Butterfly?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for those kind words. And I'm so happy to be with you. The inspiration for the book, as I think you have a sense about, was my mother, my late mother, Sylvia. And in fact, the main character is named Grandma Sylvia. And she was inspiring because, like a butterfly, she was fluttering around, but she landed. And when she landed, she was very, very present. And she was constant, and she was a reminder of all things transition, that all things changed, that all things transform. And she was an incredibly loving and attentive mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. And I was actually, you might find this interesting, Jim, I was working on a book about my dad, and I was stuck. And I took a walk, and when I came back from that walk, this fully formed book about my mom had popped into my head. And it was a children's story. I'd never written a children's book before. And my husband said, I started to tell him about it. He said, before you tell me about it, write it down. And so I did. And that was really how the story was born. It just came to me about 3 years after my mother passed away. And everything that I wanted to say about her and everything that I wanted to integrate about grandparenting with patience and perspective and just presence was in this little story. And I featured another character, a little girl, who is based on one of my granddaughters, as well as many children that I've worked with over the years in my therapy practice. And this little girl, although incredibly curious and engaged, is hesitant and has a bit of anxiety. So we pair her with this adventurous, risk-taking grandma who will do almost anything, with this hesitant, loving, sweet little girl. And we see how their relationship really impacts both of them over 3 years. And I wanted to share that we can talk about anything with our grandchildren if it's age appropriate and time appropriate. And we have the context and the space to kind of share slow wisdom and just be present with them and to really see what it takes to have a nurturing and close relationship.
I've become more convinced. Yes, indeed, this book is important to me, and the message is important to me because I talk a lot about the fact that I love being a grandparent. My wife and I are blessed to have we have 3 kids and 7 grandkids, and
Yes.
it's such a gift. And unlike so many people, Dr. Dale, our grandkids all live nearby.
Oh,
And
you're a
so
lucky man.
we are very lucky. We have 3 that are walking distance from our home, and the other 2 and 2 are 10 minutes away from us. And so we get to see a lot of them. We get to their sporting events. We're lucky enough to have a beach house in the summertime where we tend to gather. So we're really lucky to have our grandkids in our lives a lot. Never enough, but a lot. And
Yes.
I talk to friends all the time. Oh yeah, I have 6 grandkids. 2 are in California, 2 are in Colorado, and 2 are in Singapore. And I think, oh man, that must be painful to know that they're there and you love them and you want to see them and you don't get to see them nearly as much as you'd like to.
It's
How
true. And
how
it's the
about your 6?
situation.
Are they nearby?
Well, yes, actually, 4 of the 6 are under a mile away.
Oh wow, that's
And
great.
yes, and that's really, although 2 of them are now in college, but one of them's in a college near us, so that's good. And then the other 2 are in the Boston area, and we live in Connecticut, so
Yep.
they're not that far. But you raised such an interesting point, because so many people share with me, and many more since the book has come out, and I'm delighted, that because they're so far away, they wonder how they're going to be able to have a close relationship. And you'll rarely hear me talk about all the benefits of being online. But I will say that one of the great benefits is what we're doing now, and how grandparents and grandchildren, and not just grandparents, great aunts, great uncles, other important elders in the lives of children, can stay connected, can read to each other when they're very young, can have private conversations, can play a game of chess, can do an art project. It's not the same as being next to each other, but you really can connect, and you can do what you do when you're nearby, which is tell stories, share memories, talk about rituals that you've grown up with and traditions. And and I think that what's really important is that no matter what the obstacles are, that we keep reminding ourselves of the incredible benefits for both, for the young children and for the adults. There are social benefits, there are emotional benefits, there are cognitive benefits for each of this dyad. And that's the thing that can really keep us engaged and keep us going. And I think the other thing, Jim, that I'm constantly reminded of is that grandparents at the stage of their life where they are often a bit more patient, have a bit more time, and can be a lot more flexible than the parents who are very often rushing and living by schedules. And there's a sense of urgency often about so much that goes on in kids' scheduled lives. And and I think that the
By the way, isn't that a
grandparents,
big difference from our generation to
it's
today?
totally,
The amount of
totally different.
scheduling in our grandkids' lives, it knocks me out.
Well, and it should. Because what I think we can be is kind of an antidote that offers space, and that offers calm, and that offers time to explore, time to think, time to have a conversation. And then when you run out of time, then you say, let's pick this up where we were. I was talking to somebody, I think you'll find this interesting, just the other day, and she said, my kids want me to tell them stories. I said, stories about your life? She said, yes, but they want me to make up stories. So she said, so when they come over, I make up stories. She said, and then I kind of forget them, but they want me to go back and tell them the story. And I said, well, why don't you ask them to tell you the parts of the story that they want to hear more about? And then
What a
you
good
can
idea.
actually work together, because she was nervous that she wasn't going to remember the stories. And then she had this incredible opportunity to write together or to tell the story. Tell me the part of the story that was so meaningful to you. And it may
But
not even
but
be
I wonder
something
if
that she
that
thought
didn't
was
unlock a
important.
little creative gene in her that she didn't realize that she had, or maybe hadn't used in a while.
It's so true. And that's one of the both social and cognitive strengths that happen when we engage with young children. We go to places that we might not have been for years,
They might be
and we
rusty.
become, what?
They might be rusty tools.
They're rusty, but you know what? You just have to oil them out and work with them again. Because what happens is, if we see the children get excited and then we're excited, they can also teach us things that we then pile on with things that we want, and we learn and we know. And you have a collaborative effort in a story, in an art project, in a recipe, whatever it is, in building a model, in taking a walk. What you notice is not necessarily what the child notices. So you take different perspectives. And as far as perspective taking, you were so right when you said that, we didn't have all of this social media. We didn't have these screens. And so now we have to adjust, and we also have to find the balance when we're with the kids, how to do something either without the screens or to integrate the screens in a project that then is no screen. So I'm always asking people to say, do whatever you're doing outside, do whatever you're doing in nature, do whatever you're doing with an element of creativity, creative expression that doesn't require the technical assistance. And it's amazing that so many kids and grandparents really love this. And they're kind of writing things to me about what that unlocked and the opportunities that they have. And that's really what I'm after.
A couple of things you've already touched on that I definitely wanted to get to you. So let's come back to the
Sure.
on the top of the list here. My grandkids range in age from 17 to 4, and the older three, are now allowed to have a device, so we can text them.
Yes.
And if we call them, we're not going to get them. They're not used to getting phone calls. But
Right.
they do communicate by text. I think that's a gift. If I send a text,
It
I
is.
did yesterday. I texted 3 of those that are tech enabled, and then over the course of the evening to get responses from them. I'm sitting there anxious to get them. Tell me what you think of
It's
the
such a
role of
joy.
social media and the ability to text. Well, how has that changed the relationship? For me at this
I
point,
think
it's all positive. There's nothing negative
yes.
about that.
The only thing negative is when you're texting and you don't get any reply. and and you wonder because you know that your grandchild is on the texting with all of their friends. So you wonder, why am I not getting a reply? And so how you handle that, because you don't want to guilt them, say, how come you're not getting back to me? I just want to know, whatever. You try not to guilt, but you are curious. You say, I just wanted to let you know that I was thinking about you, or I saw this and it reminded me of you. I'll tell you that my husband and I right now are in a very, very beautiful place, and we're able to watch the sunrise every morning. So I like to take a picture of it, and I've started sending it to my grandchildren. And I, with a little comment, hope you have a
We
sunny
did that
day.
last night with
Sunny.
sunset.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, what's so interesting is I get a reply. And thanks so much. It's beautiful, or better than yesterday, or there's a thread that I
Yep.
didn't even know was going to be there. And for me, it's a touch base. It's just a touch base so that they know that I'm seeing something beautiful and I want to share it with them.
Yep.
At the same time, one of my grandsons wrote back and said, "What have you got planned for today?" I was like, oh my, that's so interesting. So I told him what I had planned for today. And I said, and what about you? So that was a whole other kind of dialogue. I think that when we don't overuse it, and when kids don't feel that they are required to respond, but that it's more of, hey, I had this in mind, or I saw this article. When I was growing up, my father was always clipping out articles from the newspaper and sending them to me, or giving them to me. And then when I got older, he would send them to me. And I loved that. So now if I'm online, or if I see something that I think one of my grandchildren will be interested in, I just copy the link and I send it. And I say, I thought this was interesting, or I thought you might like to talk about it, or let's focus on points 2 and 3 when you have a chance. I have some questions. Something that is not artificial. It comes from a real desire to connect about something that they are uniquely interested in. And
it's so interesting that you say that, because I'm that person that used to be very annoying to sit next to on an airplane, because I was going through papers and magazines and periodicals, and my nature is, if I read something interesting, I'm not done with it unless I've shared it with people I think will also find it interesting. Well, technology has been a benefit to the person who sits next to me on an airplane now, because I'm not shredding, but I'm still sharing. And I do the same thing. If I come across a short clip on my YouTube account that's I know it's all about a quarterback my 14-year-old grandson is really interested in, and I send that to him. It's just a great way to stay connected. And now I'm more efficient in my sharing, no less annoying, but more efficient.
It's a special kind of bonding. And what it says is, I see you. I know what you're interested in. I want you to know that I'm like fostering this connection, because this is part of our unique, special connection. One of the things I love to encourage grandparents and grandchildren to do is to find their special connection. And it could be about music. It could be about art. It could be a special joke, or watching that particular, quarterback and seeing how he's doing. I think that there's always an entry point. And because every child is different, and each of us has special interests. We can connect with those special interests. We can also learn about their interests, even if we're not so engaged with them, because what we want to do is get to know the grandchildren, and we want them to get to know us. And if we're standoff or say, oh, that I don't understand that, or I'm not interested, or that bothers me, then the door closes rather than opens. And so instead of being critical, I ask people to be curious. I was never able to watch a boxing movie because it was so violent, but I know how much you love boxing, so you're going to have to help me. You're going to have to help me with that Rocky movie or whatever it is. And so that you admit that this may not be easy for you, but at the same time, you also open the door so that you can share something. And it's interesting because in my case, I'll watch movies with my grandkids and they'll say, okay, Nana, you're going to have to shut your eyes during this part. and, and it's true. And they'll say, okay, tell me when I can open my eyes. The other thing is, the name of the book is The Turquoise Butterfly. And the turquoise butterfly means so much in my family. And sometimes my grandchildren will send me a photograph of a turquoise butterfly.
Now,
or they'll send
Dr. Dale,
if they see
you don't
something
have
in
to
a
admit it,
t-shirt.
but is there a tattoo involved anywhere here?
Yesterday, I was on the walkway and I saw a young woman with a turquoise butterfly tattoo. And I usually ask people,
member.
I know, I usually ask people if I can take a picture. And
it's so interesting that you say that, because I'm that person that used to be very annoying to sit next to on an airplane, because I was going through papers and magazines and periodicals, and my nature is, if I read something interesting, I'm not done with it unless I've shared it with people I think will also find it interesting. Well, technology has been a benefit to the person who sits next to me on an airplane now, because I'm not shredding, but I'm still sharing. And I do the same thing. If I come across a short clip on my YouTube account that's I know it's all about a quarterback my 14-year-old grandson is really interested in, and I send that to him. It's just a great way to stay connected. And now I'm more efficient in my sharing, no less annoying, but more efficient.
She was about 9 at the time. And we were talking about butterflies. And we saw a butterfly. I said, oh, Grandma Sylvia is still with us. It was after my mother had passed away, but it was not yet. I hadn't written the book yet. And I hadn't gotten the idea for the book yet. And we turned the corner on this beautiful path in Maine. And there is a woman with a child. And she is wearing a butterfly and wearing a t-shirt with a huge turquoise butterfly. And it says fearless on it. And I stopped and I looked at my granddaughter. And she went like this, like, yes, you can ask her to take a picture. And I went up to this woman and I said, I did. I said,
you got permission to embarrass the both of you.
Exactly. Well, I wouldn't have been embarrassed, but she might have been embarrassed. So, and that's a very important element. You don't intentionally want to embarrass your grandchildren. So I took the picture and I said to the woman, I said, I just want you to know, I just want a picture of your butterfly t-shirt. I said, I will promise you I will not take your face. And I just want the picture. And she laughed and she said, of course. And she posed as if I was taking the whole thing. And that became part of our book. That became part of our, the Girls of Summer book, was that wonderful encounter with the fearless turquoise butterfly.
Make this spring one to remember. Have friends over for a Sunday brunch, or celebrate special occasions like birthdays and baby showers with delicious food and gourmet gifts.
You tell the story of the butterflies. Is several things you say there just ring true with me. I told you we have a beach house, east end of Long Island, and we have in the backyard we have this big butterfly bush, and I remember catching my wife outside with our granddaughter, who was maybe 6 at the time, and they were sitting watching the butterfly bush and all the activity. And this granddaughter remembered her grandmother, my wife's mother. And I remember hearing my wife tell her, each of those butterflies is a message we're sending to Grandma. So you two are kindred spirits. But
look, in the book, there is a scene with a little girl and her grandmother at the butterflies. And why are they there? Because they had this very, very challenging day the day before, and the grandmother was really exhausted, but here they are in the garden. And they
Beautiful.
are looking at the butterflies. They're actually looking at the chrysalis.
Who
And
did
then
the
later on, the
illustration?
butterfly grows. The illustrations were done by this incredible artist whose name is Amelina Jones. And I love what she did. She really captured my mother. And it's interesting because this is really a book about emotions. And I wanted to have someone who could really draw and be very nuanced with the different emotions. The little girl has butterflies in her stomach, and and the butterflies are flapping, or they're trembling, or they're excited. There are all kinds of butterflies that I talk about because I want children to be able to recognize their physical symptoms when they are feeling a certain way, when they're sad, when they're anxious, when they're hesitant, when they're a little bit afraid. And I want them to really be in touch with their physical body so that they are not overwhelmed and that they know what they can do. The other thing is, we talk about a butterfly hug. The grandmother's always giving the little girl a butterfly hug, which is reassuring. It's very comforting. But there is actually a technique called the butterfly hug. When someone is very anxious and feeling a bit out of control, we try to get them to just do something like this: tap, 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 tap,
Interesting.
tap.
And
And
is there a
yeah,
physiological element to that?
yes, there are physiological changes. What it does is it resets the nervous system, and it's like tapping. And so I incorporated many, many physiological and psychological ways that we deal with anxiety, and that we deal with sense of wonder, and deal with hesitancy about death. And I tried to do that in a way that is going to be approachable both for grandparents or older people and children. And interestingly, what has been such a wonderful surprise for me is that the book is being recognized, which I'm thrilled about, for, dealing with emotions with children. But it's really getting a lot of recognition in the field of how to talk to death, how to talk to children about death, and how to engage children with the future when someone won't be here. And one of the things that I included in the book was what I was always brought up with my mom and my father was, this is so wonderful that we're doing this. This is so great. I love that you love this song and we're singing this song. Someday, when I'm not here, you're going to think of me when you hear that song. Or someday when we're no longer together, I will always be with you. You'll see a butterfly and you'll know that I'm nearby. And that's the message of the book, is that relationships change when someone dies. They don't end. They just transform, and they become a relationship rich with memory and story and the connection. And gee, I'm so nervous. What would my grandma say that I should do right now? Or what did grandma do when she felt this way? So that we are, as children, part of a long line of a family. And when
You're
we're
part of
lucky
something
enough,
bigger.
we are. And children need to know that. Children need to be reassured of that there's this whole set of habits, rituals, traditions, customs, dances, music that we had long before, that I listened to from my grandmother. And now I'm sharing it with you, and you're going to internalize it. And then if you're going to have children, you'll share it with them, and it will be a continuation. Children need to know who they are, where they came from, what is their identity. And it's the grandparents and the uncles and the aunts and the dear friends who knew the stories that can not only share that, but can be and be the repository of that information, but can answer questions. They can answer questions. How did you get to school in your day? What did you do without
Well, we
a cell
walked down the
phone?
street with Fred and Barney Flintstone.
Exactly. Exactly. Or
Everything you touch
how
on,
did
Dr.
my
Dale,
grandmother die? What?
everything you're saying, you touch on another nerve. Well, we won't get through a fraction of the things I want to talk to you about today. But one, you just brought up the songs and the connections and multi-generation. My kids knew my mother a little bit. She died young. And when she was in her last weeks, she loved the play Phantom of the Opera. And when she was on literally her deathbed, she just listened to that music over and over again. And I didn't realize it, but my kids, who are now adults with their own kids, they say every time they hear that music, they're transported back there to grandma. Even if they didn't know her directly that well, they know her through the stories. And to hear them tell those stories just makes me realize that we're multi-generational as a family. We're very lucky. And that they realize that they're just another generation of a long line of us. And music and memories and stories. But you mentioned something earlier I wanted to come back to. You didn't want to embarrass your granddaughter, so you got the high sign from her that it was okay to ask the young lady to take the picture of a butterfly shirt. I had an experience, it was a year and a half ago, to go to a Time Magazine 100 event. And I came home and the next day with telling my older 3 grandkids, a girl, a boy and a girl in that order, about who I met the night before. So my grandson is a super sports fan, and he was thrilled that I had met Mahomes, the quarterback for Kansas City. And then my 2 granddaughters were embarrassed when I told them that I met another young lady and we had conversation before the event, but I had no idea who she was until she got up and started singing and dancing. I think her name was Dua Lipa. And the 2 girls were like, "Oh my God, he's so out of touch." But now I hear them telling that story. So I think being self-deprecating helps them to appreciate it. And they like to embarrass me by telling that story to their friends now.
Because it becomes a story of rich life. It's not just a story of success. It's a story of fumbles. It's a story of failures. It's a story of embarrassments. This makes people real. It's authentic because here is this wonderful grandpa who's so fantastic in so many ways, and he didn't know who that was. And oh my gosh, he's so out of touch. Because it's such a wonderful way to keep us humble, to keep us human. It's also a way to keep us engaged because we say, I don't want that to happen anymore. So you better keep me posted on who the hot stars are and who I need to know about and what books are you reading, which I also want to mention because it's kind of full circle. We were talking about what we can do with the screen. I like to read what my grandchildren are reading, and I like to be able to talk about the books with them. And it's something that I've tried to do with as many of them as I can. And I find that what they see in the books, as a former teacher, I'm always kind of guiding, and I have to not do that. I have to sit back and really just say,
Boy, that takes some
ask the
restraint, doesn't it?
questions. Yeah, it does. But what comes to me is so interesting and not which I had expected. And the same is true, by the way, with the book. I was reading the book to a group of young children at a library, and I read and then I go like this and I talk about it. But I leave it for a minute and I say, and what is it that you see here? Well, it's amazing what kids tell you. And then they ask you questions about it. Why did you do that? Or why is that here? That's not in the story. Why is that there? And it's so interesting because you really, when you read any book with a kid, I think it's important not just to read the story, but to let the story evolve from the page and see what they see in the story. And, aside from with older kids saying, well, have you ever been in a situation like that? Did you ever know a person like that? Oh my gosh, that's really hard. What do you think they should do? Or what do you think they will do? Engaging. But with a children's book, I have found that what kids see is so often what I might have put in there as an afterthought. And that's what really jumps out at them.
How do you encourage, and I guess, well, should you and how do you encourage them to imagine?
I think that children
let me give you the purpose for the question.
Yes.
Many years ago, I was a fan of Dr. Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yes, of course.
And I'm friendly now with his daughter who continues his work. She wrote a terrific book a year or 2 ago about people like me, old, broken down people. And the name of the book just captures the idea, which is living life in crescendo.
Oh, I love that title.
Don't you? And that's how I choose to lead my life. Different people
Yes.
think of later life as in different forms. They're going to retire. They're going to go to Florida. They're going to, unplug. And I'm the opposite. I gotten to know so many people. I had so many experiences. I got so much more I want to do. I'm living my life in crescendo. Well, anyway, her father,
Yes.
Stephen Covey, ran a program one time that I attended. I think it might have been in Las Vegas or someplace, but he had divided the audience in two big groups. And he told one group that after this half-hour presentation, they were going to be required to retell that lesson. And he told the other story. He didn't tell that to the other group. The retention rate on the test afterwards was so dramatically different by those who thought they might be called upon to stand up and tell a part of that story. They listened differently. So that comes
Yes.
back to my question of imagining and encouraging people. I remember my father would yell at me if he thought I was daydreaming.
Uh-huh. And I think daydreaming is one of the most wonderful things you want to encourage. You may not want to encourage it in math class, but you definitely want to encourage it. Exactly. So there's a time and a place for everything. But yet for some kids, daydreaming in math class gives them the opportunity to open their mind to see a different kind of solution. So more about that later.
So if you're sitting down in a class with those kids and you tell half of them that they might be called upon to elaborate on the story afterwards, I wonder how their cognition changes versus the placebo.
You're talking about something that is also the essence of the book and the essence of my next children's book, which is all about noticing.
The next one, you wrote your first and you already got the second one in the wind.
And it's coming out in June. I was like a crazy person, but anyway, and that's all about kids and nature. But it's really about helping children to stay present and to focus and to give them permission, not so much that they're going to have a test, but that I'm so interested in what you've learned from this experience. I'm so interested in what your impressions were. What did you notice? What stood out to you? What are the 5 things that you think you'll take home with you? You can ask people in ways you can ask people to attend and to be mindful and to be present without having them feel as if there's going to be a test. And because the test raises the anxiety level and it adds a level of stress. And I think what's really useful and what helps with the creativity and the creative process is a balance between enough stress and also open door for creativity, to let something just pop in. I mean, and I'll come back to what I said before. I was so stressed by being stuck, by not getting the right way for my book about my dad, that I took a walk, put it out of my head, and what comes in? This whole other story about my mom.
Now, poor dad still hasn't gotten his book. What's up?
You want to know something? And I don't believe in coincidences, and I know it wasn't supposed to be a book. And it right now was published as a story in the most recent Chicken Soup for the Soul collection, What I Learned from My Dog, because the book was supposed to be, and the story is about my dad who had Alzheimer's and his relationship with his dog, Murphy, and what we all can learn from the patience and the constancy and the non-judgment of the dog, and how the dog is really the model caregiver. So that story is now in the Chicken Soup for the Soul. And what's so interesting is my dad loved short stories, and he used to love reading books of short story collections. And it just seemed a perfect place for him to be.
Wow.
And it's called Murphy and Jerry.
Did you have grandparents growing up?
I had, for like 2.5 minutes, I had my mother's parents. It was very sad. I don't think my mother ever really got over the loss of her mom. Her mom died when I was not yet 2, and then her dad died when I was 3. And I had my paternal grandfather with whom I was very close and remember everything about until I was 8. And then I had my paternal grandmother until I was in my late 20s. And she and I were very, very, very close. But I respond to this question differently than how I did when I was a kid. I think that I knew my maternal grandparents better than most people who've had their grandparents, because my mom, who was so close to her grandparents, told stories about, they were so present in my life. The memories were always with us. The recipes. My favorite soup spoon that I grew up with was my grandmother's spoon. Whenever I had soup, I had her spoon. And my mother always wore hats, and I liked hats. And we always had pictures of my grandmother who wore hats. And my mother would take me to the cemetery when we were growing up, and we would sit and we would hear stories about my grandparents. And so I felt an amazing kinship with
There's
a
so much
parent.
in that ritual there. I remember
There is.
going with my paternal grandmother, who was a big influence in my life, because she was my father's mother. My father was the oldest of three boys. Her husband died like at 48 years old, back before there was
Uh-huh.
Social Security or anything like that. And he had a painting business. So my grandmother kept that business going, anointed my father, who was the oldest, maybe at 21, just out of the service, that you're going to be in charge of the business now. Because I had,
Yes.
a couple of dozen men. They didn't want to hear from this 5'2" Irish lady what to do. So she ran the
Right.
back of the house, and he was the
Uh-huh.
puppet who ran the quote unquote front of the house. But I learned so much from her. But we would make those pilgrimages to the cemetery seasonally, plant different things. And
Yes.
those were very important times in my life. And I've heard from my sisters and brothers that when they did that one-on-one time with her, and it was just quiet, and we lived in beautiful, very crowded Queens. And that was
Uh-huh.
like a respite, this quiet place where we felt very
Ah,
nature-centric, and you'd have wonderful conversations with grandma at the graveside.
yes.
So come back to
Well,
that, because it touches on something you mentioned before, which is the whole idea of grief and how you think about people and remember them.
Well, I think that we can hold, both feelings. We can be sad and we can be grateful and happy. And when we remember, we can have tears, but we can also feel the love. And I believe strongly that there is this eternality of love, that love is eternal, which is why I talk about the relationship as transforming, not ending. And it's and when you look at signs and symbols that are around that also bring the person to mind, even if they're not on the top of mind, it's something that is so incredibly powerful. I was walking with a friend yesterday, Jim, and it was so interesting because her eldest grandchild is getting married and they're making plans for the wedding. Her grandmother apparently loved trees, and she used to hug trees. And the granddaughter said before the wedding she wanted to go with her mother, and she wanted to go to the forest, and she wanted to go and look at the trees that her grandmother loved. And the mother, my friend, was so surprised. And there was something tactile and fundamental and organic and natural that this young woman on the eve of her wedding wants to be able to connect. And that's the way she feels that she will connect with her grandmother, by going and being in nature with the trees. So there is a connection that each of us can have on our own. And I believe that we can nurture that in children and as grandparents, because for most children, the first person they're going to lose is their grandparent.
Yeah.
And so if they can feel that all of these memories and all of these activities and all of these things that we're doing, are part of our connection, our unique connection with this person, then we will feel secure. It's not that we're not going to feel sad. We're going to feel horribly sad. We're going to miss the person. We're going to want them to be at every single wonderful event that happens in our life. But if we play it right, I believe that through the tears, we can also feel their presence, and we know that they are with us in a spirit. And I don't think you have to be a religious person to have this connection. I think you just have to be a human being that is open to paying attention to what it means to be a human being in a relationship. It's so affirming, Jim. It is so important for children to hear how important they are, not in a spoiled way, but that they're seen by the people who are the most important people in their lives, their family.
When
And
it-
so when people
At that
can
Thanksgiving
articulate,
gathering, when my daughter, the oldest of my three, talked about her niece and what she thought, it was the expression on my niece's face, who was
right,
8 at the time. It was, it'll never leave me. She was just enchanted to know that she was seen like that.
that's the point. Years ago, I wrote a book with my niece, and it was called The Kindness Advantage, and it was all about kindness. And really, one of the kindest things that we can do for anyone is to take a moment and not be distracted by anything and share with them why they are important to us, or what we've learned from them, or what we admire about them. It is so incredibly important. And if children can hear that as they grow up from in an authentic, deep, connected way, it helps to really solidify their sense of who they are in a world that can be so, so challenging to navigate. But if they know that Papa thinks this of me, and Aunt Sue told me that that she smiles when she sees me because of this, that this is what really is the essence of who we are, that we have something that's real inside of us, and it helps to build our resilience, and it's there for us to go back to when we feel on shaky ground, because that's the essence of the people who know us well. That's the essence of that eternality of love.
Well, I know you're already on to your second children's book, and I know we're already on our way to a second dialogue around your first children's book.
I'd love it.
Because I have so many pages and notes of things that I want to ask you about that we didn't have time for. You're terrific, Dr. Dale, and this book is so important. And as a grandparent, understand I'm going to be out there beating the drum for grandparents, parents, and kids alike to read the Turquoise Butterfly, because there's so many good ideas, lessons.
Thank you.
So thanks so much for doing it, and thanks
Thank
so much
you.
for spending time with me today.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to our next conversation. Take good care.